today, what I want to go over with you all is how can we create projects and maybe even some assignments that lead up to the project for our students using just the standards or curriculum maps that you might have. Now, I'm going to start off with, again, I teach history. I'm really familiar with it. So at this point, it's more of a thing for me to be able to say, like, hey, okay, what in here is accurate, what is it not? And I still might miss something right now. Thoroughly gone through this outside of what it generated, but I haven't like got into the details yet. But overall, from what I was kind of going over, it looks pretty good. This is another one of those days where I kind of went ahead and did the work in ChatGPT ahead of the time. We're just going to go over the results. Again, that just comes down to the unpredictability of what these AIs can come up with. Now, no matter what you get, the foundation is going to be the same. The principles or what I'm going to be showing you, it's going to be the same, and it just might be laid out differently. And I kind of liked how it came out the first run through, so I ran with it. Again, today I am using the free version of ChatGPT, GPT 3.5. That way, you know, if you're like, hey, I want to try this, you know you have access to it. I want to kind of change up the format of this video real quick. Normally, I give this disclaimer towards the end of my videos, but I really want to kind of front load it going forward. This technology does not replace you. And I really hope that is evident in this video that we're about to go through. This is not meant to replace teachers. This is a tool. I just attended a webinar that was put on by the Department of Education Technology over the weekend, and they used a analogy that I really liked when we're talking about AI. It is that this technology is not a Roomba, it's an e-bike. And what we mean by that is you're in control, right? A Roomba, you hit the button, it just goes and it does its own thing. It maps out your house. There's a whole bunch of privacy issues that go with that. If you're okay with it, whatever. I know I am. I don't like hair. I've got a big dog. Besides that, though, this is an e-bike, right? It automates some things for you. In the e-bike's case, it automates the pedaling. In this case, we're going to just go ahead and assume that what we did today, this is the leg work, right? The pedaling that makes so much of our job daunting and just eat into our personal time, which is kind of what we signed on to when we became educators. But now there's light at the tunnel, and maybe it doesn't have to eat up as much of our time. So I'm going to jump right into it and show you kind of what I did here. I gave it the initial prompt, right? I want to create a project for an 11th grade US history class. The following is relevant content that should be included. And I just went through and I copied this entire central column here. It includes the topics that you can go, like what it's focusing on in this part of the unit, some essential questions that we can look at, and then really important concepts of vocab that the students should be covering as they go through. As you can see, it's all the same right here. So what it gave me is this. It gave me this huge project that on its initial generation, I looked at it and I go, that is a lot. And that's like a semester project. Some of you might be those really like experienced teachers and you're like, I got that in the bag. I can do it in 2 weeks. Good on you. But what I ended up doing is kind of chunking it out. So the project overview, this made it all one. So project components, it wanted a research paper, some kind of visual presentation, role player debate, documentary or podcast, and interactive timeline. All of these on their own to me come off as really good project ideas. And even it kind of hit me when I was making this, like student choice is becoming a really big thing. And giving students that ability to engage in our material in differentiated ways. I think that it kind of did that without me asking for it, right? So, I mean, if we have those kids that really like writing research papers, and some of you probably go like, yeah, that doesn't exist. I had one, right? It came up, I spent all this time coming up with a fun project where they get to make a presentation and like some diorama stuff, and the kid just came up to me and said, can I just write an essay? Yeah, yeah, you can. So that's where I think this is. It just differentiated this overarching project. And then it kind of gave some evaluation criteria, pretty good stuff to kind of go off of. And yeah, it works. Now, first thought in my mind was, okay, well, let's try and create a rubric for these areas. And yep, it did, right? So, and obviously go through, put it into a spreadsheet, whatever you got to do, have the columns, you know, research paper, hey, depth of research, organization, whatever it is on that front, make your own little categories if you want, but there's some good baseline thing. And you can even have it create a, okay, cool, I want to do this and create four different categories. I want a 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, 4 points for the max. And what would be the criteria for each one of those? It'll do it. Visual presentation. And so it went through and it did it for each of the projects presented, right? Now, my next prompt was, again, instead of can the project components be made into their own projects with each focusing on 2 to 4 important concepts provided earlier. So I was kind of recalling this right here, the important concepts. I wanted 2 to 4 of these to be incorporated into the components, right? So it did. It created individual projects. And so industrialization, robber barons, investigating the Gilded Age. I mean, that's a really good topic. If we're looking at that industrial capitalism, the robber barons and their roles in shaping US policy, domestic side, those civil rights issues that come into that, it's a really good one that it kind of spit out at us. Social Darwinism, progressive response. Again, each of these are really good project titles if you wanted to get your students to just kind of dive into it. So again, I'm pretty happy with what it came up with. And then finally, my next prompt over here, actually, it's not finally, we're about halfway. Can you create supplemental materials to assist students, such as sentence stems, vocabulary word banks, and some core issues they could focus on for Project 4? So I really wanted to focus in on this labor unions and fight for workers' rights. Now, some of you might be thinking like, oh yeah, that's my IEP kids, 504. Absolutely, right? Some of my students, even in 11th grade, still require sentence stems in their IEPs, word banks, or things like that. So you know what? Here, let's go for it. Let's see what it comes up with. And I mean, it came up with some pretty good prompts to get them going, right? If you were to break it out for them and give them a graphic organizer on this, like, hey, if you've got a template, plug those in or make your own. Vocabulary word banks, again, all these things are completely relevant to this topic. So again, did a really good job. Core issues to focus on, yeah. I mean, all of these things are things that the students need to be dialing in on that project for what they're going to do. So if they did this, it was great. Now I think for this one, it recommended they can choose to create a documentary, podcast, poster campaign. You can go back then and even make it any of these. Like if you want them to do an essay because you're like, hey, they messed around when the sub was there, yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, make them do a research paper. But outside of that, any of these things are valid options that you can just kind of incorporate into this. Great news is I think I saw a news flash kind of a thing that they're expanding we're going to call it the memory of GPT, so it can recall information from further back. If we went like 20 more messages down and just completely just kept putting in prompts, eventually the AI is going to forget earlier portions of the conversation because it's not within its working memory. So that's just something to kind of remember, point out to you. Now, when you go in and you're using GPT-4, it has a significantly longer memory than 3.5, but at the same time, it still does have a cap. So let's keep going down. And yeah, so these were some pretty good things, good ways to help, again, differentiate and accommodate, make modifications to your students. Now, okay, so we have the project, but like, okay, how do we get them there? If you're one of those like long-term subs, or this is your first year teaching this topic, and you're like, yeah, no, I haven't really learned about this specifically since I was in like high school myself or my undergrad. Here's some ideas, right? So, what kind of assignments can we give the students to help them build up to that point to do the project? If you don't have anything, yeah, this would be a good portion going forward. So, again, it came up with some research and report case study analysis. So that's where you provide them with the material. You kind of go over it, you have those classroom discussions, just some good stuff to go through. Now, some of these kind of like, again, it gave us another project. I mean, that defeats the purpose of what we're doing. Same up here. I do think this is a fun one to do in class where you kind of you split the class up into groups and you say you have tables, split the group down the middle, maybe kids on one side choose one side of the issue, other one's the other side, and they just kind of go and they do this legislative advocacy exercise, again, that kind of blends, or you can blend these two together even. And then current event, I like that one a lot because it brings in like, hey, this stuff over here, it wasn't in the past or exclusively in the past, like it still happens today. So I mean, we see in the news child labor laws are being messed with and stuff like that. So I mean, that's over here, but it's also a current event. So being able to connect the past and the present is a really good thing to build those connections within our students. And some of us, we got to recognize our students don't care about the news. So I mean, at least make them aware on that front. They're not paying attention. So it's really important. Can you create a list of materials and topics that can be used to create assignments for ideas 2 and 6 and material that would be good for the teacher to have prepared? Now I'm just kind of like brainstorming what else could I do on this one. So for 2, this was the case study analysis. And again, if you notice, I just said ideas, right? Ideas 2 and 6. And it knew what I was talking about. And then materials that would be good for us to have ready. So for the students, some case studies, get those prepared. It even gave some pretty good ones. Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire, I believe I had pulled it up earlier because it's one of those things. New York City, deadliest industrial fire in history. So that would be kind of tying into the workers' rights and like safety within the workplace, all those things. Haymarket Affair, Homestead Strike, Pullman Strike. Again, SHAG, if you guys are history teachers and you have not used it, it is a great resource. It's the Stanford History Educational Group, and they have some really good materials. But again, that was all over here that I did not plug in. Access to relevant primary, secondary. Again, SHAG is going to give you some great primary, secondary sources, as well as the Library of Congress. Now for the teachers, hey, go ahead, have your notes on those materials or whatever it is, slideshow presentations. You know how this works. Again, potential topics, it gave some ideas. Current events, again, hey, all of this stuff is really good idea if you are new to the classroom or you've been in the classroom for a while and you're thinking like, hey, what can I do to kind of change it up because I haven't changed anything in a while. There you go. Here's some ideas. Or maybe you have a project that you've always wanted to do, but the thought of the legwork that goes into it to prepare this thing is just so daunting. And by the time summer break hits, you're like, I just need a break. And then next thing you know, the school year starts and you didn't do it. Hey, here's the legwork. Okay. Now, I did tell you at the beginning of this, it's based off of standards, right? And if you notice, they're all over here and I haven't touched those yet. So I have my own standards, all these standards, I pull them out, I pull them into a Google Doc on my own just to like have them organized so I can kind of plug and play as needed. It is nice that this one, again, by unit kind of pulls out those standards, which is cool. It's nice. So this is what it kind of wants you to think on. Now, this very first one, I went to copy and paste and I only pasted the last one. So I'm going to kind of skip it and I'm going to go down to, all right, here we go. So for the following assignments and the options for project 4, which of the following standards are addressed by each assessment? So I plugged in all of the standards that I have for my class, things that weren't even on this initial list over here, just to kind of see what it gave, and it did a pretty good job. So again, we can see based on the components, it kind of went in order here. So again, standard 14, evaluate the impact of individuals and reform movements on the struggle for greater civil rights and liberties throughout U.S. history. Hey, this assignment and project components explore the impacts of individuals and reform movements on the struggle for civil rights and liberties throughout U.S. history. Specifically, they address the rise of labor unions and their role in advocating for workers' rights. I mean, that's what the students are doing, right? So it hit that one. If you see another one that you want to check, just pause the video, kind of look at it and go as we kind of move through this. but I'm just going to pull out a couple other ones. So 34, the assignment and project components indirectly touch on the effects of media in shaping public perception and policies, such as how labor movements were portrayed in the media. Now, if you notice, for the civics portion, 34 was not mentioned over here. And it did kind of say it was that indirect touch on, right? So that's good. So maybe you want to really kind of incorporate that portion a little bit more and it's no longer indirect. It gave you an idea or it gave you that like justification or that like relevancy to those theme standards, right? So again, really good stuff over here. And then in this case, I put in the geography or the economics one and it didn't pull anything. That's just something like, hey, maybe I hit that word cap and it just kind of like said, I'm done. That's totally fine. Maybe it finally hit the memory piece and it's like, yep, and I'm calling it good at geography 40. There we go. At this point, this is where I would kind of cap it off anyways, and then maybe pick something relevant too. This is a really good start. This is how you can just take those standards. I know my first year teaching US history to seventh grade, only curriculum I was given was for first semester, and it was the We the People curriculum. It's a great curriculum, do not get me wrong, but that entire second semester, I was just making my own stuff, kind of coming up with it based off of my standards that I had. So, having this tool back then probably would have made it a lot easier, would have spent a lot less nights at home working on my stuff. But, is what it is. Again, I'm going to be doing another video here in a little bit that kind of touches on how to, if you find a topic in here that it wants to discuss and you're like, awesome, how do I find some resources? I'm going to be using Bing to make that happen. So I'll show you how this one works. This is an internet one that kind of goes through and it'll pull primary, you can find primary sources, secondary sources, just relevant sources, academic sources, all of those things. So I hope this was helpful. If you stuck with me to the end, thank you. It does help if you like and subscribe to this. Even if you don't watch the whole thing, you kind of went through and said like, hey, that's an idea I might try. I'd appreciate it. Maybe we can help out some other people as well. So other than that, I hope you have a great day and I will be talking to you all soon.